Okay, hi, and welcome everyone. Thank you for being here today to the NetBeez Expert Series webinar. As I said, today we have two special guests that will talk about how to have solid Wi-Fi performance. The agenda for today's webinar, we'll start with introducing the two guest speakers. We'll then go through a set of questions that will be around how it is troubleshooting without NetBeez. So what was the situation for these wireless and network engineers without the tool, and then how things change with the implementation of NetBeez. We also talk about how COVID changed IT operation and network management in general, and also how NetBeez helps with that. And lastly, we're going to also review some use cases and real examples that can give some clear insights onto how is the process, right, of troubleshooting with the Wi-Fi probes, for instance. And lastly, we'll open up for your questions. So please use the Q&A section of the webinar. So we'll cover that, and we'll have Curtin and Christian try to answer as many questions as possible during this webinar. And without much adding, today I'm really happy to have as a guest speaker Curtis Larsen, who is a principal wireless engineer in one of the large healthcare and higher education institutions based in Salt Lake City. And with him, we have Christian Johnson, IT specialist at the same organization. So welcome, guys. Nice to have you here.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
My name is Curtis Larsen. Like Stefano said, I work for a large healthcare / higher education institute based out of Salt Lake City. And we're happy to be on, talk and share about some of our experiences with Wi-Fi in general and NetBeez. I've been doing this for a while. I have about 15 years here at the university. I started out on the campus side and then later migrated over to the hospital side as we merged network teams. So I've been, on the hospital side about 9 years, but we do the whole thing. We do the whole campus, we do the hospital. We have, roughly about 13,000 access points, 250 buildings, and we've got four wireless dudes. So it's me and it's Christian and a couple other guys, and we take care of the whole thing. So, but yeah, I'll turn it over to Christian to let him introduce himself.
Yeah, Christian Johnson. I work with Curtis. Yeah, we got a lot of stuff to cover basically. And I've been in the low voltage telecommunication industry for about 10 years, and 5 of those were here at the university as a wire guy. And the next 5 years I've spent working as a network engineer / wireless engineer. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, and welcome, guys. Really excited to have you here today. So why don't we maybe open up to, you, Curtis, told us a little bit about numbers, about the environment, but can you just tell us a bit more about the network where you operate and any interesting numbers for the audience?
Yeah, sure. We've got a lot of access points. We've got a lot of users. On a typical day, we'll see when school's in session and everything, we'll see about 100,000 unique users come through. We see on a typical day, we're around 45,000 simultaneous users at peak. So it's a pretty big operation. We have 6 wireless controller clusters, HA pairs that we maintain, and then we're in charge of keeping not just the wireless access points up and the controllers, but we take care of the onboarding process. We take care of we're in the process of migrating Radius servers, from old servers to new ones. We're migrating our management platform from the old one to the new one, like a lot of you probably are. So, we have a lot of stuff on our plate, and then we have a few tools that help us, with troubleshooting and visibility and things like that.
Thank you. That's great. So can you tell us a bit more about how was troubleshooting before NetBeez?
Yeah, well, like I said, we're just a few guys, and we've got a lot of things on our plate. We have, projects. We've got a lot of projects that we've got to get done, and then we do. Every year we're doing 2 to 3 new buildings. We're also doing, probably 15 to 20 remodels every year. So, we've got to focus on that stuff. And then in the meantime, we just get hammered with tickets, right? So before NetBeez, oftentimes what would happen is a user would, make some bizarre claim about Wi-Fi not working, once a week or in some little area at some certain time or something like that. And then, we'd send out an engineer, and oftentimes this is a senior engineer that's working on other projects and things like that. And, inevitably we'd go on site and then not be able to reproduce the problem. And, we can't stay there all day because we got other things to do. We got other projects. And, then we'd come back or something and try to close a ticket. And then, of course, the user sometimes didn't even know we were there because maybe they could make it, or maybe they couldn't make it. Maybe they saw us, or maybe they didn't. And so we want to close the ticket, and the user wants to open it and say, hey, you didn't do anything, or the problem's not solved, or, so a lot of times this was cyclical, and we'd try to close tickets and they're trying to open them. And, we're getting 35, 40 tickets a week with a handful of guys, and we're trying to close things out, and we got other things to do. But this is, that's kind of where we were. That's where we were with NetBeez, and we're looking to, kind of get out of that. Yeah,
that makes sense. There's a lot of time spent in, just set up time, go on site, set up all the, tools to capture the information. So mostly, what type of problems really were you looking to solve when you had, made the decision that, hey, I need a tool here, I need to be more efficient. And I cannot spend all this very valuable engineering time in maybe solving these issues, right? Or collecting the data to solve these issues. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So for us, we have a help desk, but they do very little troubleshooting, right? Like they're more like routing the ticket to the right group, and so we can't ask them to do a whole lot. We have some students that work in our NOC, but they're part-time and they come and go, and you don't have a lot of time to spend with them training them. But what we were hoping to do is offload, this initial information gathering, and we're hoping to offload a lot of the basic ticket troubleshooting. And really, like every good engineer, we're trying to find a way to duplicate ourselves, just so we can have more people responding. We want customers to feel like they're responding and that we care about them. We want to solve the problems, right? And so we're looking for ways to do that. And, I just remember one time I was, working with the supervisor of the NOC students and saying, hey, how can we get them to take on a little bit more and do a little bit more? And he says, well, write it up, And so I put together like a basic troubleshooting document. And I'm a real fan of, something in the industry that people call the bottom up approach. So I like to start at the RF layer. And then if the RF layer is not the problem, the authentication layer.
Yeah.
And then if that's not the problem, look at DHCP and then DNS and so on and so forth. And I put this together, and, I put some stuff in there about the 802.11 state machine, and you got to verify that, your association request and response and authentication request and response and everything like that. And I put this together, and I was like, yeah, and I even tried to make it somewhat interactive, and, handed this off to the supervisor of the students. And we tried it for a few weeks, and it was just like, he came back and he's like, it's just too difficult. It's just too complicated. So we really struggled to get the students enabled, up to where they could take on this, what we feel like is more of the basic troubleshooting or the original information gathering process. And, we found out that it's easier to teach them to drop a probe in a building, drop a NetBeez device. And then the cool thing about that is that an engineer, when he gets a moment between projects and meetings and different, and, a new building design and a remodel or whatever, he can step off and take a look at that information, that data that's flowing in from NetBeez. And so we started out small, first we only had 5 probes, and then after we built a new building and stuck 5 or 10 and put 5 or 10 more in there. And then, we had a small amount of probes, but we were moving them around. And we were just kind of testing the waters and seeing how it would go. But then I noticed a trend where more of the wireless engineers were putting probes out there more often, and they liked it, right? Because it was like, hey, the user can't say that we're not doing anything because we are. We put a probe there and we're getting information, right? And then at the same time, it's like, I don't have to be on site because, I'm just waiting for the problem to happen. We're waiting to replicate the problem. And so, it just kind of continued from there, but that was kind of how we started out. And that's what we were trying to solve, is just offloading, the ticket, the basic troubleshooting stuff.
Like basically a repetitive task, and where there's a lot of setup time, but also like you need a way to capture data without staying yourself 2 weeks in a location to capture the data. And then of course having something 24/7 with historic is always better than the problem.
And the resources that we had oftentimes were part-time students, and it's like just at the point where you get them to understand layer 1 or something, now you got to start on layer 2, and it's like, okay, now they're off to a new gig, or he's just not around enough because he's part-time or something. So that was kind of the challenge. So
can you tell us a bit more on how that process changed with work from home? Clearly, like a lot of lockdown for a long period that we couldn't really leave our homes nor be at the office. How did this change in general?
Yeah, well, it was it was very interesting when the pandemic hit, and these challenges that we had were just that, like, as engineers, we didn't want to go on site. We didn't want to be in a student environment or in the hospital environment. So some of the stuff that we were starting to develop to do remote troubleshooting just kind of grew and became, more important. I remember there was a point where there was a building sort of designated as like, hey, this is the location where, students that are infected will go. And it was like, we were terrified to get a ticket to go there, right? We don't want to, because all the kids, would have COVID, or whatever. But so yeah, I mean, we don't want to be on site. Patients don't want us in their space because, they're afraid we have COVID probably. Students don't want us in their space because they're, afraid of the same thing. So we were really kind of forced to solve problems the way that we had just barely started with this small group of NetBeez devices. We were forced to use them more and more because we were like, how can we solve this problem without going on site? And so, the good news is that along the way, we had some federal funding with the CARES initiative for COVID as well. And I'll let Christian speak to kind of how we used that and the deployment that he worked on with that.
Yeah, sure. So with CARES funding, we expanded our quantity of NetBeez agents to like 100. I think we got 108 with the CARES funding, but basically we were able to go in and place a dedicated NetBeez agent in almost every building across our campus and in the hospitals, which basically, it allows us to be able to go and say, hey, either send a student or ourselves, or if there's a local IT guy on site, be like, hey, there's this NetBeez agent that's right here, go take it wherever you're experiencing an issue and plug it in right next to that device that's having an issue. And as far as the deployment went, it was really, that's one of the things I love about NetBeez, is that it's very simplistic as far as getting your devices set up and ready to go, and then going and taking them out and putting them wherever you're going to put them. You don't have to do a huge amount of prep work, in the lead up to getting it deployed. And that's been one of the greatest things as far as us being able to utilize these tools as well as we have been, I guess. So yeah. It was a lot of agents to deploy, but the time in which it took it was more time consuming to get them out and on site than it was to actually prep them and get them going. So
gosh, The plug and play, that's good. So in that student housing example, were you able to, in that case, for example, to just rely on the sensors? How did you manage that?
So with the student housing, that was kind of nice because we were able to take basically the agents that we had assigned for those buildings, and we took them to the main housing office and just left them there with them. And we had them set up a checkout program. So when the students experience an issue, they basically could just go to the front office. You know, they'd submit a ticket and we'd tell them, hey, okay, you're having these problems. Go to the front office, check out one of these NetBeez probes, take it, plug it in your room and next to whatever device it is, or even just in the general area that you're having issues. And we can then use that device to see what's going on without actually being there, which, you know, when it came to the whole, or to COVID as a whole, that was kind of nice for us because we didn't have to worry about going up and being on site in person. And it gave us a, you know, a visual view into their space without actually having to be there to physically watch what their device is doing. So that's been super helpful. And
Yep. Thank you, Christian.
Yeah.
Do you guys, Curtis or Christian, any like example on clinical, for example, you know, clinical environment clearly is very mission critical, and also myself, I work in the healthcare system in a former life. So can you tell us a bit more about any use cases there that are really relevant?
Oh yeah, I mean we run into scenarios all the time where we've been able to deploy the NetBeez. You know, I remember one of the first ones, just when we had a handful of NetBeez probes, and one day I got a high ticket that came in, and they said all the wireless is down over at this clinic. And you know, the first thing I start doing, of course, is looking at my, you know, basic key performance indicators, and I'm looking and I'm like, okay, we've got 300 clients that are up and connected. You know, I start looking at things like, you know, channel utilization. Channel utilization is low everywhere. I don't have interfering devices, right? I'm looking at my air quality scores and things like that. And, you know, I've learned over the years not to express opinions. So, you know, I didn't say, no, you're all, you know, crazy. There's nothing wrong. I just started sharing data, right? So I'm like, hey, I've got 300 clients up. I've got, you know, low channel utilization. You know, the signal to noise ratios look good. You know, things look happy. And the funny thing is like so this came over from the client team, and then all of a sudden I've got project managers that are emailing me like, hey, when are we going to fix the network? When's it? I'm like, the network's not broken. You know, I didn't say that, but you know, I'm just like, here's data, right? So I just try to give them data. But the thing that I think a lot of times we don't realize as wireless network engineers is, you know, the client teams or the users, they don't understand what channel utilization means. Yeah. You know, they don't understand what RSSI is. Right. They don't understand what, you know, what a good client count on an AP or a bad client count is, or, you know, so it's like you're speaking a foreign language sometimes. And then, so with this particular one, I said, okay, you know, we spent a few hours on that. They were all convinced that the entire network was down. I was convinced that everything was perfect. We left it that way, and in the morning, I dropped by the clinic on my way in, and I took with me a NetBeez probe. And these were WOW carts, they call them, wireless on wheels carts, thin clients that they do their medical stuff on. So I strapped a NetBeez probe to one of these wireless carts. Luckily, their UPS that powers the thin client had another outlet for another device. So we plugged in the NetBeez. I put it on the cart. I took my business card and I strapped it to there, and I told the nurse, I said, so on the NetBeez that we had at the time, it was a little bit different, but it had like a LED that would blink blue. And then I told the nurse, I said, the moment this cart stops working, I want you to send me a text message, because it was working at the time. And because they would tell me, yeah, well, they worked for a while and then they stopped, right? So I said, the moment that thing stops working, you send me a text message. And I want you to also tell me, what is this blue light doing on this thing? Is it still, I think at the time it was like a flashing blue light if it was connected, you know?
Yeah.
And then I jumped in the car and I went to work, and it's about a 30-minute 30, 35 minutes from there or something. And before I even pulled in the parking garage at work, I had a text saying that the cart was broken. And so I went in up to my office and I sat down, pulled up the dashboard, looked at the NetBeez, and the NetBeez was connected. And it had been connected the entire time.
So use a perception mostly also here.
Yeah, so I'm just comparing, right? So now when I went to the client team, I didn't say, this is RSSI and this is channel and this is air quality and this is, client. I said, I have a device. It's been up for 2 hours or something. Your device won't stay connected for more than 15 minutes. I don't know what's wrong with it, but the network's up.
By your domain, at least, yeah. Well, what did it turn to be in the end, or what were the next steps, or the conversation, let's say?
Yeah, well, the conversation just basically stopped.
Okay.
But we didn't, the ticket got sent to them and it never came back. And then later, it was probably a couple of weeks later, I ran into one of the guys that used to be on the client team, and then he started working for the architecture team. And I said, hey, whatever happened up there at that clinic? I never heard. And he said, oh, yeah, that one, And he said, they found out there was some issue with the RAM on the thin client. And so they were running out of memory or something. They never, whoever solved it or whatever, never told me. Anyway, they replaced all of the thin clients in that one area. So there was one area on the first floor where they had probably, 10 to 20 thin clients or something. They replaced them all with new thin clients, and somehow that solved the, quote unquote network down situation. So yeah, that was.
If you had to troubleshoot this manual, would have been a lot of time wasted versus like, getting the probe out there and collect all the data.
Yeah, because, they were telling me, hey, it takes a while before the problem happens, and so, well, I got things to do. I don't want to stay out there all day. I don't want to stay out there for, hours and hours waiting for a problem to happen, especially when I don't believe there's a problem, at least from the network perspective. So, yeah, but at the same time, you want to be responsive to customers. And when they see you out there, they realize something's being done, even if you just leave a device. And the wonderful thing is, if I tell a client guy, hey, I have a client, which by the way happens to be, a $35 Raspberry Pi. But if I tell him I've got a client that's working and staying connected all day and it follows your device around and yours doesn't work, that's something that he understands. He gets that. Right. Yeah. He understands that, he needs to do something to figure out what's wrong with the client. And that's how it worked out.
That's good. So a typical problem, at least myself had, was users complaining the network is slow, which is like, all right, it could be a lot of things. Do you ever, use probes to troubleshoot these issues, or hopefully, not every week, but I'm sure they're pretty frequent also in your case?
Yeah, we get those from time to time. Recently we had one where, the COVID paradigm has really changed how people work. Where it used to be that you could sort of depend on a user being in their space or their office or their cube or whatever daily. I got a call. We had a ticket that came in the other day, and the user says, well, I'm only here, once a week in this building because I work from home most of the time, but I come in once a week. But what I've noticed is the network here is way slower than at home. The Wi-Fi, right? The Wi-Fi is slow here, and when I go home, it's faster. So is it just because my Wi-Fi is fast at my house? And she's like, well, here's the result. Somebody told me to do a speed test. So I did a speed test, and the speed test is like, I don't know, 100 kilobits per second or something, up and down, something terrible, right? In that one, the challenge is this, right? Like, I got a ticket. I've got 100 other things on my plates. I've got projects that are waiting. I've got buildings that need to be designed. We've got remodels that we're doing. We're trying to work on radius servers, and we're trying to work on new management platforms. And I've got this ticket, and it's open. And then she's telling me I got to wait a week before I can visit, right? or sit down with her. So, the nice thing in this case is, I just said, hey, Christian, can we get a probe out there, right? So maybe the next day after the ticket came in, Christian drops a probe on site. And then, later on when I get a chance, I log into the dashboard and I take that probe and I do some speed tests. And I see, we were just using 20 megahertz channels there, but it's 100 plus megabits per second up and down.
Yeah.
So the speed tests are fast on the probe. And so the nice thing is now I can just set that to run the speed tests over and over on a scheduled basis. And then when she comes back in a week, I can meet with her. So I did. So a week later, she was in the office. I called her up. I said, hey, we left a device there a week ago. It does speed tests, and all the speed tests are fast. And she says, oh, well, that's so strange or whatever. And it turned out that it had to do with her docking station. So she had a docking station that the laptop was plugging into, and when she would plug in the docking station, it would somehow get confused between which connection to use, the wired or the wireless, or I don't know what was going on exactly. But so yeah. But the thing is that like she wasn't interested in looking at other sources of problems or considering that it was a docking station or something else.
Yeah.
Until we said, hey, there's another device sitting right next to you and it's fast. Right. And the nice thing is, we didn't have to, necessarily make ourselves available, a week later at the moment. We spent the week with a device where nobody's on site and it's constantly gathering information. So now I got a week's worth of data that's like, the network's fast.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was the docking station. So we had her unplug the cable. We had her unplug the wired cable out of the docking station, and then amazingly everything was fast.
So really like a troubleshooting with quantitative data and not just with opinions or like provide evidence of what you collect to the end user, whoever it is. And
yeah, I have a saying that I adhere to, which is the man with the most data wins.
That's nice.
So when you get into a debate or an argument, or this can be with users or with client teams or server teams or whatever, but like the guy with the most data is going to win. And I've usually found it's best to keep opinions to ourselves until the data illustrates that.
Fact.
Yeah, the fact. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Perfect. So I don't have any more question before the Q&A. Just one last. What did you like of NetBeez? What do you really capture your attention when you decide to move forward with NetBeez? Clearly, you guys are pretty invested in NetBeez in terms of number of probes and make a lot of use operationally and for support.
Yeah, well, we started out small with NetBeez because we wanted to make sure that we were getting value out of something and just see what it could do for us before we expanded.
Yep.
But when the time came and remote troubleshooting was our new world, it made absolute sense to just expand what we were doing. But yeah, there was a point where we were looking at other solutions, all the typical solutions that I think most people are familiar with on the market. And there's a few things. One of the things is I'm a Linux fan, and NetBeez is running on Linux. It's using basically a Raspberry Pi platform. It was nice to be able to log into the dashboard and see that you can drop to a console and get all your familiar Linux tools. I mean, just simple things like ping and iPerf, and we've even some of them we've added. MTR is one of my favorites, and we even have WaveMon running and a few other things that we've stuck in there. But off the bat we were just like, oh, this is flexible. It feels like you could use it to do what you want, and basically do all the same type of things that I would do if I were at the site. So, when we looked at other solutions, when we asked about, what you can do or what you could change, it was almost always like, no, you can't change that. No, you can't do that. No, it wasn't meant for that.
Locked down, yeah.
Yeah, it was very locked down. So, that was appealing to us that things were open. And then when we started out small with just a handful of devices, we came to NetBeez saying, hey, well, could we do this? Or could we do that? And, the answer wasn't no. I mean, sometimes they were like, do you really want? But they were open to our use cases. One of them is like the packet capture function.
Right.
We really found a need for packet capture. We had a scenario in the hospital where we were chasing around these label printers. We had label printers that were having trouble with DHCP. And it came to the point where we had to do packet captures, and these label printers happened to be in the patient rooms. And, we had done some packet captures that were in the hallways, and we're reviewing the packet captures and we're missing frames.
Oh, wow.
But we were missing frames in such a way, like where you might be missing some 802.11 authentication frames, but you see a successful 802.1x authentication. And so it's like, that it worked, but you just missed the frames on the packet capture.
Oh, wow.
And so we had to, adjust our process, and we had to do packet captures in the patient room in order to get all of the frames. And so, we requested that feature. We requested packet capture because we want the NetBeez not only to be able to simulate a client experience, but make it so that we don't have to be in the patient room, or we don't have to be in the student room, and we can take that probe and remotely flip it to packet capture mode and remotely grab a PCAP and pull it down and review it without, being there. So that was an advantage for us. NetBeez was responding to our requests there. We had actually tried packet capture on some other solutions and had some really poor results with that. So yeah, NetBeez seemed open. It seemed to use familiar Linux and Unix utilities, and they were, you guys have been responsive to us in feature requests and turned some of them around quickly. There's others, that we've asked for too, that we've got that are pretty cool.
Great. No, thank you. And actually, packet capture was also a nice collaboration. I think you give us feedback for the first beta version, and no, definitely was something that more companies then saw the value in it. So actually, it was really good. And actually, I think we released it in Q2, if I'm correct, right? In version 8.0, if I'm correct. Yeah. All right, great. Well, I think it's time for the Q&A. I want to, meanwhile, thank you, the two of you. Let's see how many questions we have. All right, so the first one is from Eric. He's asking, have you faced any challenges with UDP-based jitter latency sensitive applications on wireless networks? How did you overcome them?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So problems with jitter and UDP based applications. So yeah, we have Vocera devices in the hospital. We've recently done a deployment with the Volt, which was acquired by Hillrom Versity phones, right? So they're Android phones, but they're used for nurse call. And so all the calls that they make for all the nursing functions happen over Wi-Fi. And so, yeah, we've had to troubleshoot those. I remember a scenario where Christian, left the NetBeez probe out at one of our clinics when they were troubleshooting some NetBeez, or sorry, when they were troubleshooting some Vocera issues with call quality or whatnot. And there is in NetBeez a MOS score function, right? So when you start talking about voice applications and they can be SIP or UDP based or whatever, then, you know, talking to a voice person and saying, hey, MOS scores on my device are good, you know, that's kind of like, what? You just said the magic word that, like, you know, so yeah, I mean, we haven't had the scenario where we needed to, you know, strap a NetBeez to a Vocera badge or a nurse call phone yet. But, you know, we've used you know, you can do the latency jitter tests, packet loss, and then, you know, get results on MOS scores back and share those with people. I'm trying, you know, we had some problems with Versity phones in the hospital in terms of roaming. And so we used various tools to gather data on, you know, when devices were roaming and which ones were having trouble. And we ended up changing the wireless configuration on our controllers, which at one point was set to use adaptive roaming. And for the Android handsets that we have, it turned out that it was better for us to have that setting using 802.11r. And with over-the-air enabled. So we changed that setting, and that resolved problems for those voice applications. So yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Curtis. I have another question that you already answered on the chat, but we can, you know, bring it up here. Regarding the layer approach you mentioned at the beginning to troubleshoot Wi-Fi, what layer do you typically find most issues?
Yeah, well, so I was joking around, but like layer 8, right? The user. So, you know, I always tell the guys on our team, rule number 1 for troubleshooting, Christian can tell you, rule number 1 for troubleshooting is never believe the user. But rule number 2 is always act like you believe the user until you have the data that proves that you can't, right? So, no, I mean, a lot of times things aren't what the user thinks they are. But yeah, the real question was which layer, right? The real question was which layer do you see most of the problems? That's an interesting one, you know. I would say that on our campus, we probably do more 802.1x than most organizations do. We do a lot of EPTLS. Even for like IoT devices and medical devices, oftentimes we're doing EPTLS. And when we're not doing EPTLS for those devices, we do PEEP. So we do a lot of 802.1x. And I see a lot of problems at that layer, right? So I would, you know, in terms of Wi-Fi troubleshooting, I'll call that layer 2. Okay. And so we see a lot of medical devices that don't do it right. And then we see, you know, they'll have a spec sheet that says that they're doing it right or whatever, but when it comes down to how it functions, or it comes down to how they, you know, deploy it in mass versus configuration 1 by 1, you know, we've seen some issues where they don't do those things right. I've seen packet captures where, you know, an iPad, you know, I've seen packet captures where an iPad is, you know, not sending an 802.11 authentication request, or sorry, response. You know, so it does an association request, an association response, and then it doesn't, you know, it doesn't send the next packet. And we've said, you know, so, you know, there's some layer 1 things, there's some layer 2 things. Honestly, you know, I've seen a lot of layer 2 stuff. You know, there's a lot of
device driver buggy.
Yeah, and so it helps to have a device that you're familiar with and you have some visibility into and some control over that you can compare with it.
So the Wi-Fi connection timing that we have implemented in NetBeez, and that was helpful because you could see that actually the NetBeez sensor would be able to do that, you know, Okay.
Yeah, it's been yeah. You've got the graph there that shows, hey, you know, we're reconnecting. So we're seeing how much time it takes to associate. We're seeing how much time it takes to authenticate. We're seeing how responsive the DHCP server is, and the time it takes. So yeah, that's been helpful for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you, Curtis. And we still have some time if you want to submit the last questions. We have one last question. This is for Christian, actually. And this is from Kent. He's asking to Christian, do you have any 802.11 AX installed? That's the first of the 3 questions.
Sorry, microphone mute.
Yes.
Yeah, we do. Just as of this year, have started implementing, putting in 802.11 AX APs. There aren't quite as many devices out there that I've seen yet, but there are a few laptops and a couple of phones here and there that are starting to use it. As far as the NetBeez agents are concerned, we don't have the current agent that we have only have AC capable NICs in them. So at some point we will have to do an update with NetBeez and have them send us out newer NICs when that time comes, but we haven't quite utilized it or had a need for it just yet. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say out of roughly 13,000, I think we're probably at about 4,000 AX access points today.
Yeah.
So do you believe even if you have an AC sensor at the moment, is it still helpful even if you have an AX network there?
Yeah, I mean, it's still, you're still going to be able to use the AC sensor to, work on those channels. It's just a matter of whether or not, if the specific device that is having problems is an AX device, depending on what kind of device it is, I imagine you can tweak that device to work in the network that, so for like instance with a Windows device, you could tell it that you only want it to use AC channels until we're at a point where AX is, more readily available or usable. So
yeah, absolutely. All right, good. I think that was it. All the part of the Q&A. It was really great, an honor really to have you here on this webinar, share your stories with the audience. So thank you so much, Curtis and Christian. And for the attendees, the webinar is over, and you'll make sure to find this the video recording. We'll post it in the next days, so you can also rewatch it offline or share it with your audience. From NetBeez, I want to thank you all for attending this webinar. And thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. See ya.
Bye. Bye-bye.
See you guys. Have a good day.
Cheers.